Dawn arrived with cold fingers, scratching at Sebastián Marquez's exposed skin. His eyes opened slowly, focusing on the grey sky stretching over Plaza del Olvido, a small park in the heart of a neighborhood he'd never stepped foot in during his 38 years of privileged life. The wooden bench where he'd spent the night creaked under his weight as he tried to sit up, and every muscle in his body protested with a dull, deep ache. The clothes he wore, carefully selected from a donation warehouse 2 weeks earlier, smelled of dampness and someone else's sweat. The grey flannel shirt had a calculated tear at the elbow, the jeans were authentically faded, and the athletic shoes, once white, now showed layers of real dirt accumulated during his first days on the streets. He had practiced his transformation with the precision of a method actor, studying every detail, every gesture, every expression of resignation he saw in the faces of those living in urban invisibility. Sebastián rubbed his week-old beard, another layer of his disguise, and watched the park slowly awaken. A man pushed a garbage cart, searching for cans and cardboard. 2 women walked hurriedly toward the subway, cleaning uniforms peeking out from under their threadbare coats. A group of construction workers bought coffee from a street vendor, their harsh laughter cutting through the morning air. This was his new world, at least temporarily. And it had all begun with a betrayal. 3 months ago, in his office on the 42nd floor of the Marquez corporate building, Sebastián had discovered that Ricardo Villamil, his best friend since childhood, the brother he never had by blood, was orchestrating a complex legal maneuver to take over his company. Falsified documents, purchased testimonies, bribed shareholders, all executed with surgical cruelty that revealed years of resentment hidden beneath false smiles and traitorous embraces. The memory hit him with visceral force. Ricardo laughing at him in the elementary school playground when Sebastián arrived with broken shoes and an empty lunchbox. "Poor boy," he had shouted, surrounded by other children. That word had been a knife that lodged in his 8-year-old soul and was never completely removed. Now, decades later, Ricardo wasn't just trying to steal his empire, but was doing so while building a political career based on a fabricated image of philanthropist and defender of the dispossessed. The hypocrisy was nauseating. Sebastián stood with difficulty, feeling the cold bite his feet through his worn sneakers. He had designed this experiment with the same meticulousness with which he built his fortune, 8 months living as a man without resources, without contact with his previous life, without a safety net beyond a bank document stored in a safety deposit box that he would only open in case of extreme emergency. He wanted to prove to himself that his success hadn't been luck or privilege, but pure intelligence and determination. He wanted to demonstrate that even stripped of everything, he was still Sebastián Marquez. But as he walked through the unfamiliar streets, his stomach growling with hunger, a question pursued him like a shadow. What if he discovered that the person he was without his money wasn't someone he liked at all? Hunger was different when it was real, not the polite appetite he felt at his business lunches, where he chose between Norwegian salmon or Kobe beef. This was a painful emptiness that made his hands tremble and clouded his vision. Sebastián had spent 3 days eating only what he found: half a sandwich abandoned on a park bench, a bruised apple someone had left near a trash can, water from public fountains. The small restaurant Doña Marta's kitchen appeared like an oasis on his 4th day of ordeal. It wasn't elegant: peeling yellow walls, scratched formica tables, mismatched metal chairs, but the smell of chicken broth and freshly made tortillas emanating from inside was an unbearable temptation. He entered with his head down, adopting the hunched posture he had perfected, dropped shoulders, eyes avoiding direct contact, short and hesitant steps. He slipped toward a table in the farthest corner, where light barely reached, and waited for someone to notice his presence. A robust woman behind the counter, presumably Doña Marta, observed him with a mixture of compassion and distrust that Sebastián had learned to recognize these days. It was the look that said, "You're poor and maybe dangerous, but also human and maybe needy." "What will you order?" she asked with a tired but not cruel voice. Sebastián swallowed, savoring the humiliation this moment required. "Could you give me a glass of water, please?" His voice sounded hoarse, not entirely acted. He had shouted very little these days, spoken with almost no one, and his vocal cords felt rusty. Doña Marta nodded and brought him a glass of water with ice, a small luxury that Sebastian had stopped taking for granted. He drank slowly, savoring each sip while observing the restaurant's diners. They were mostly workers, men in construction uniforms, women in domestic service clothes, some students with worn backpacks. All ate with the appetite of those who had earned their meal with hard physical labor. That's when she entered. She was 32 years old, though her eyes carried the weight of 40. Her black hair was pulled back in a practical but messy ponytail, strands escaping everywhere, as if she had spent the day bending down and standing up 1,000 times. Her cleaner's uniform, navy blue pants and light blue shirt with a cleaning company logo, was damp at the knees and elbows, stained with chemicals that had left whitish halos on the fabric. Her name was Elena Jimenez, though Sebastian wouldn't know this until minutes later. She moved with the efficiency of someone who had no time to waste, walking directly to the counter and ordering the daily special with a tired but genuine smile for Doña Marta. While waiting for her food, Elena looked around the restaurant. Her eyes stopped on Sebastian. He felt her gaze like a physical weight and shrank further into his chair, wanting to disappear. But instead of looking away with discomfort or disgust, the reactions he'd received from others seeing him in his current state, she simply tilted her head slightly, acknowledging him with basic humanity. When Doña Marta brought her plate, rice, beans, a small piece of stewed chicken and tortillas, Elena looked at it, then looked at Sebastian again. Something changed in her expression. She stood without a word, walked to the counter, and had a quick conversation with Doña Marta. The restaurant owner frowned, shook her head, but Elena insisted, pulling out some crumpled bills from her pocket. Minutes later, Elena approached Sebastian's table with a second plate in her hands. She placed it in front of him without ceremony, along with clean utensils wrapped in a paper napkin. "Eat, please," she said, with a soft but firm voice, without a trace of condescension. "No one should go hungry." Sebastian looked at her, genuinely astonished. In his previous world, charitable gestures came with expectations, public recognition, tax advantages, entries to exclusive events. But this was different. This woman, who clearly had little, was giving part of that little without asking for anything in return. "I can't accept," he began to say, his voice breaking for reasons that weren't entirely acted. "You worked for this." Elena sat in front of him without invitation, with the familiarity of someone who has no patience for unnecessary formalities. "We all work for something," she responded, beginning to eat her own food. "And we all need help sometimes. Today is your turn to receive. Tomorrow, when you can, it will be your turn to give." The simplicity of her philosophy completely disarmed him. Sebastian looked at the plate in front of him, humble food but prepared with care, and felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Tears threatening to emerge. He held them back fiercely, blinking rapidly, and began to eat. The taste was indescribable. Not because it was gourmet food, it was far from it, but because it was the first meal someone had given him with genuine care in more time than he could remember. Each bite was a lesson in humility he hadn't anticipated in his carefully orchestrated plan. "My name is Elena," she said between bites, extending a worked hand toward him. The nails were short and clean, but the cuticles maltreated, the skin rough from so much contact with detergents. "Sebastian," he responded, taking her hand. It was the first time in days he'd touched another human being with positive intention. The warmth of her palm against his felt like electricity. "How long have you been on the street, Sebastian?" she asked, without beating around the bush, the directness of someone accustomed to facing problems head-on. "Not long," he lied, adjusting his prepared story. "I had losses, businesses that went wrong. Everything got complicated very quickly." It wasn't completely false. His life had imploded quickly when he discovered Ricardo's betrayal. Only his response had been to hide in poverty instead of fighting from his position of power. Elena nodded with understanding that suggested she'd heard similar stories before. "Life can change in an instant," she said, more to herself than to him. "I know that too." They continued eating in a silence that wasn't uncomfortable. Sebastian discreetly observed while she finished her plate, noticing the efficient way she cleaned every grain of rice with her tortilla, wasting nothing. It was the type of economy learned by necessity, not by choice. When both finished, Elena stood and collected both plates. "I have to go," she said, consulting a plastic watch on her wrist. "My next job starts in 40 minutes. "Next job?" Sebastian asked, genuinely curious. "I work in 3 places," she explained naturally, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. "Office cleaning from 6 in the morning to 2 in the afternoon, then cleaning in a supermarket from 3 to 7, and 2 nights a week I do night shifts at a hospital." Sebastian did the mental calculations. That meant this woman worked approximately 70 hours per week, not counting commutes between jobs. The idea left him speechless. "Why 3 jobs?" he asked, though he intuited the answer. Eleanor shrugged with a smile that didn't reach her tired eyes. "I have 2 younger siblings in school. My parents had to return to the village. My father is sick. Someone has to pay the bills and make sure my siblings finish their studies, that they have the opportunities I didn't have." The determination in her voice was iron, polished by years of sacrifice. Sebastian recognized that tone because he had used it himself when building his empire, when he refused to accept no as an answer, when he worked 20 hours a day to turn his tech startup into a corporate giant. But there was a crucial difference. He had done it for personal ambition, for thirst for success and recognition. She did it for love, for responsibility toward people who depended on her. "If you need anything," Elena said, searching in her bag, "this is the restaurant where I have lunch most days. Doña Marta is a good person, and—" She pulled out a small card with handwritten numbers. "This is the number for the San Jose Community Shelter. They give hot food twice a day, don't ask questions." Sebastian took the card, the cheap paper folded in his fingers. "Thank you," he murmured, the word feeling inadequate for the magnitude of what he'd just received. Elena touched his shoulder briefly, a gesture of solidarity that pierced through all of Sebastian's defenses, like a hot knife through butter. "It's going to get better," she said with conviction. "I don't know when, but it always does if you keep trying." And then she left, disappearing into the flow of people on the street, leaving Sebastian alone with his chaotic thoughts and an unsettling sensation that his carefully controlled experiment had just derailed in a direction he hadn't remotely anticipated. The encounters became an unplanned routine. Sebastian discovered that if he arrived at Doña Marta's kitchen around 2 in the afternoon, Elena would be there, transitioning between her jobs like an exhausted butterfly that could never stop. The first day after their initial encounter, he arrived at the restaurant with the intention of thanking her properly. He had managed to wash dishes at a small cafe during the morning, his first real job in 2 decades, and they paid him with a sandwich and 20 pesos. It was money genuinely earned with physical effort, sweat that wasn't metaphorical but literal, and when he saw Elena enter, he bought 2 cheap orange juices and offered her 1. The surprise and pleasure on her face was worth more than any $1 million contract he'd signed in his previous life. "Did you find work?" she asked, accepting the juice with a smile that illuminated her tired face. "Something temporary," Sebastian responded, keeping his story vague but believable. "Washing dishes, carrying boxes, whatever comes up." Elena nodded with approval. "That's how you start. My first job was exactly that, washing dishes in a restaurant. I was 17, and my hands bled at the end of the day because the detergent was so strong. But they paid me, and that was what mattered." They sat together, sharing a space that was becoming comfortably familiar. Elena pulled out a Tupperware from her enormous bag, a homemade lunch with rice, fried egg, and ripe plantain, and without asking, pushed half toward Sebastian. "I can't keep accepting your food," he protested weakly, though his stomach growled with anticipation. "It's not accepting," she corrected with simple logic. "It's sharing. There's a difference. My grandmother always said, 'Food tastes better when eaten in company.' Besides, I cook for my siblings every morning and always make extra. You're not going to let it go to waste, are you?" She was playing with his pride in an intelligent way, and Sebastian recognized the benevolent manipulation for what it was. He smiled, a genuine smile that surprised even himself, and began to eat. While they ate, Elena talked about her life with the naturalness of someone who kept no shameful secrets, because there was nothing to be ashamed of. She spoke of her family that came from a small rural community in Oaxaca, where her father had been a carpenter until arthritis made his work impossible. Her mother had worked in the fields until a fall permanently injured her back. "I sent my parents back to the village 3 years ago," Elena explained, deep sadness coloring her voice. "It was better for their health, cheaper to live there, and my aunt could take care of them. But that meant I stayed here with Javier and Sofia. Javier is 17, he's in high school. Sofia is 14. They're good kids, studious. Javier wants to be an engineer. Sofia wants to be a doctor." The pride in her voice was palpable, vibrant like a golden thread woven through her exhaustion. "They must be very grateful to you," Sebastian commented, thinking of his own youth when he had worked tirelessly but only for himself. Elena shrugged. "That's what family does. It's not about gratitude. It's about love, about doing what needs to be done. My grandmother raised me with that value. We always take care of our own, we always share what we have, no matter how little it is." There was something profoundly beautiful in that philosophy, a simplicity that Sebastian had lost somewhere along his climb to wealth. In his corporate world, every transaction was calculated. Quid pro quo, investment and return, contracts and escape clauses. The idea of giving without expecting anything tangible in return was almost revolutionary. "And you?" Eleanor asked, pulling him from his thoughts. "Do you have family? Anyone who knows you're like this?" The question hit him with unexpected force. Sebastian had built a life surrounded by employees, business partners, occasional lovers who came and went like tides. But real family, people who would love him regardless of his bank account, that was something he had lost or rejected long ago. "Not really," he responded, and it was the most honest truth he'd said in days. "My parents died when I was young. I don't have siblings. There were friends once. But things change." Ricardo appeared in his mind like a toxic shadow. The best friend turned enemy. The betrayal that had led him to this absurd experiment. Elena perceived something in his tone, a door closing on the subject. She didn't press, and Sebastian silently thanked her for that sensitivity. Instead, she changed the conversation to lighter topics, the telenovela she watched with her siblings at night, the stray cat they fed in their building, funny anecdotes from her jobs. "Yesterday," she recounted between laughs, "I was cleaning an executive office and found a modern sculpture, you know, one of those that cost thousands of pesos, but nobody understands what they represent. Well, I was cleaning it very carefully and my rag got stuck. I pulled a little and the whole sculpture came apart. It turned out it wasn't a solid piece, it was like 20 parts stacked. I spent 40 minutes trying to reconstruct it before anyone noticed." Sebastian laughed genuinely, imagining the scene. "Did you manage it?" "More or less," Elena admitted with a mischievous grimace. "I think 2 pieces ended up in different order, but nobody cared. They probably didn't even notice. Modern art is weird like that." In his previous life, Sebastian had bought dozens of those incomprehensible sculptures for his offices, spending fortunes on pieces he pretended to appreciate, but that really only served as status symbols. The irony wasn't lost on him. As the days passed, they established a pattern. Sebastian worked at whatever he could find, washing dishes, loading merchandise, sweeping streets, always keeping a low profile, always moving. Elena appeared at the restaurant like clockwork, and they shared improvised meals, conversations that flowed from trivial to profound without effort. Sebastian began helping her with small things. When he saw her struggling with 3 heavy laundry bags on her way home, he offered to carry 2. She protested initially. "You don't have strength to waste either," but he insisted. As they walked through the cracked streets of the neighborhood, Eleanor told him more about her life, her interrupted dreams. "I wanted to study nursing," she confessed as they climbed the stairs of her building, a worn 5-story apartment complex without an elevator. "I was saving, had started some night courses, but then my dad got sick and, well, priorities change." There was no bitterness in her voice, only pragmatic resignation. Sebastian felt each word like a reproach to his own life of wasted excesses. Elena's apartment was tiny. 2 small rooms, a kitchenette with appliances that probably were 20 years old. a microscopic bathroom. But it was impeccably clean, decorated with family photographs in cheap but cared-for frames, floral curtains she had sewn herself, plants that miraculously survived in windows facing a grey alley. "Sofia, Javier, come meet my friend Sebastian," Elena called upon entering. Two teenagers emerged from one of the rooms. Javier was tall and thin, with the beginning of an adolescent mustache and intelligent eyes behind glasses with frames repaired with tape. Sofia was smaller, long and shiny hair, face suspicious of any stranger her older sister brought home. "Friend?" Sofia asked with a protective tone that reminded Sebastian of a tiny guard dog. "Yes, friend," Elena confirmed firmly. "Sebastian is going through a difficult time and I'm giving him a hand, like we would want to be helped if we were in his place." That simple explanation disarmed Sofia's hostility. The girl nodded slowly, accepting her sister's logic. Javier stepped forward and extended his hand. "Nice to meet you," he said with curious formality. "Is it true you helped Elena with the laundry bags? She never lets anyone help her. She must like you." Elena gave her brother a playful punch on the shoulder. "Don't be a blabbermouth." But Sebastian noticed the slight blush on her cheeks, and something in his chest tightened in a way he hadn't experienced in years. During the next hour, while Elena prepared dinner for her siblings, simple pasta with homemade tomato sauce and toasted bread, Sebastian fixed broken things in the apartment. A loose leg on the dining table, a window that wouldn't close properly, the bathroom door that stuck. He used basic tools Elena had in a box under the sink, and while he worked, he invented stories about how he had learned these things before everything got complicated, half-truths that tasted like ash on his tongue. The truth was he knew how to do these things, because once, decades ago, he had been a poor boy who helped his widowed mother keep their small apartment functioning. Those dormant skills awakened like atrophied muscles coming back to life. When he finished, Sofia looked at him with new approval. "Thank you," she said simply. "The window has been like that for months." Elena insisted he have dinner with them, and Sebastian accepted because refusing would have been insulting. They sat at the repaired table, so small that their knees touched underneath, and shared the humble meal. But the conversation was rich. Javier talked enthusiastically about his math class. Sofia described a science project about ecosystems. Elena gently corrected them when they talked with their mouths full. It was a family. Imperfect, struggling, but undeniably united by bonds that money couldn't buy or break. When Sebastian finally said goodbye and left into the cold night, walking toward the shelter where he now slept on a cot among 30 other people, he realized his experiment was mutating into something he hadn't planned. He wasn't learning about poverty. He was learning about humanity, and the lesson hurt in ways he hadn't anticipated. The month arrived like an inexorable tide. Sebastian had established a routine that would have seemed impossible weeks ago. Temporary jobs during the day, shared meals with Elena when their schedules coincided, nights at the shelter where the noise of 30 men snoring, coughing and crying in their dreams kept him awake until dawn. But the strangest thing was how his body and mind were adapting. The first days, every muscle screamed in agony. Now, although exhaustion was constant, his hands had developed calluses, his back had strengthened, his mind had found ways to survive the brutal monotony of sustained physical labor. What he hadn't anticipated was how Elena had become the gravitational center of these days. He thought about her constantly, the way her eyes wrinkled when she genuinely smiled, how she hummed songs while working, the fierce protection she felt toward her siblings, the generosity that never wavered even when she herself had so little. One Friday afternoon, Sebastian was waiting for her at Doña Marta's kitchen when he heard raised voices outside. He immediately recognized Eleanor's high-pitched tone, not of fear but of furious indignation. He ran out and found her on the corner, confronting a middle-aged man dressed in a cheap suit and stained tie. The man had his hand on Eleanor's arm, and she was trying to free herself. "I already told you I'm not interested," Eleanor was saying with a firm but tense voice. "Let me go now." "Come on, don't be like that," the man insisted, breath smelling of alcohol even from several steps away. "I just want to buy you a drink, get to know you better. You're a very pretty woman when you don't have that angry face." Sebastian felt something fierce and primitive awaken in his chest. He crossed the distance between them in seconds, placing himself between Elena and the man. "She said no," Sebastian declared with a voice he hadn't used in weeks, the voice of executive authority that made employees tremble in boardrooms. "Let her go, now." The man evaluated him, worn clothes, unkempt beard, posture suggesting nothing to lose, and something in his calculation changed. He released Elena's arm and stepped back. "Not worth it," he muttered, spitting on the pavement before walking away with unsteady steps. Elena rubbed her arm where the man had grabbed her, red marks visible on her skin. Sebastian felt an almost violent impulse to follow the man and teach him a more permanent lesson, but he restrained himself. That wasn't his role now. "Are you okay?" he asked, genuine concern in his voice. "Yes," Elena responded, though her breathing was a bit accelerated. "That's Ramirez, the supervisor at one of my jobs. He's been bothering me for months. Today I finally told him to stop clearly, and he didn't like it." "Elena," Sebastian spoke carefully, "if he's harassing you at work, there are laws. You can report him." She laughed, a bitter sound that didn't fit her usually optimistic nature. "Report him to whom, Sebastian? To his boss, who's his brother-in-law? To human resources, which doesn't exist in that company? I'm replaceable. There are 100 women waiting for my job if I lose it. That's reality." The powerlessness in her words hit him like a hammer. Sebastian knew about labor laws, about corporate structures, about how the system supposedly protected the vulnerable. But all that theory crumbled in the face of the brutal reality Elena faced. She needed that job desperately, and men like Ramirez knew it and exploited it. In his previous life, Sebastian would have made a phone call. He would have sent his lawyers, would have destroyed Ramirez's professional life with ruthless efficiency. But now, as nobody, he didn't have that power. He only had his physical presence and his impotent rage. "There's something we can do," he insisted, his business strategist mind awakening. "There are always options." Eleanor looked at him with deep exhaustion. "Not for people like me, Sebastian, not in the real world." They entered the restaurant in silence, and that night the conversation was forced, interrupted by long, uncomfortable silences. Sebastian saw Elena lost in dark thoughts, her usual energy dimmed by visible worry. When they said goodbye, she touched his arm softly. "Thank you," she said, "for being there, for caring." Something in her gaze made Sebastian's heart do a painful flip. They separated, and he walked through the dark streets feeling a toxic mixture of emotions, attraction he couldn't allow himself to feel, guilt over his imposture, rage at his own fabricated powerlessness. 3 days later, the problem resolved itself in a way Sebastian would never confess. He used one of the public phones near the shelter to make a clandestine call to his head of security, a loyal man who had sworn not to reveal his whereabouts. The instructions were precise. Investigate a certain Ramirez, cleaning supervisor at a certain company. If evidence of harassment was found, submit an anonymous report to the corresponding labor authorities. 2 weeks later, Elena arrived at the restaurant with a smile that illuminated the entire room. "Sebastian, you won't believe this," she said, practically bouncing. "Ramirez was fired. There was an anonymous investigation. They found he had harassed several women, not just me. He's gone. And even better, the company offered me a raise and a better schedule to avoid legal problems." Sebastian smiled, genuinely sharing her joy while guilt gnawed his insides. He had interfered, had used his hidden resources to change her situation. On one hand, he had protected someone vulnerable. On the other, he had violated the terms of his own experiment, had deceived more deeply than he already was. "I'm so happy for you," he said, and he meant it. "You deserve it." That night, sleeping on his cot at the shelter, Sebastian faced an uncomfortable truth. He was falling in love with Elena Jimenez. Not in the superficial way he had loved women in his previous life, models, actresses, executives who were accessories to his image. This was different. It was admiration for her strength, respect for her integrity, longing for the warmth she radiated even in the darkest moments. But it was built on a lie. She knew him as Sebastian the homeless man, not Sebastian Marquez the multimillionaire. What would happen when he eventually had to reveal the truth? Would she hate him for the manipulation? Would she think it had all been a cruel game? The experiment that had begun as a way to prove himself, to symbolically revenge Ricardo and all who had belittled him in his childhood, had transformed into something much more complex and dangerous. He was falling in love with a woman who could never love him back if she knew who he really was. Summer advanced with its suffocating heat that turned streets into ovens and small apartments without air conditioning into saunas. Sebastian had gotten a more stable job as a delivery assistant for a small courier company. The salary was miserable but constant, and it allowed him a certain predictability in his chaotic new life. Elena was thriving. With the new schedule and salary increase at one of her jobs, she had managed to reduce to 2 jobs instead of 3, which meant she now slept 5 hours per night instead of 4. It broke Sebastian's heart that 5 hours of sleep were considered a luxury in her world. One Saturday afternoon, Elena invited him to accompany her to the market where she bought provisions for the week. They walked together among the colorful stalls, her negotiating prices with the skill of an experienced diplomat, choosing vegetables with a critical eye, calculating every peso spent. "See this cauliflower?" she said, holding it up for his inspection. "It has some spots, so the vendor will give me 30% off. I can cut off the bad parts and the rest is perfect. Rich people throw away food that we would consider a banquet." Sebastian thought of his own refrigerator in his mansion, probably still full of expensive organic food that his staff replenished weekly, much of which ended up in the trash. The image made him feel physically sick. While Elena shopped, Sebastian carried the bags that were filling up. He noticed how several vendors greeted her by name, how she had built relationships in this market ecosystem, how her generosity created waves. She gave extra tips to an elderly woman selling herbs, bought cheap candy from a child who was clearly helping support his family, gave coins to street musicians. "If you have so little, why do you give so much?" Sebastian asked, genuinely confused by the economics of her generosity. Elena stopped, thinking seriously about the question. "My grandmother taught me something important," she finally responded. She said, "Wealth isn't measured by what you have, but by what you can give. When I was a girl in the village, we lived with very little. But during festivals, everyone contributed something: tortillas, beans, music, manual labor. Nobody had much, but everyone had something, and together we created abundance." She continued as they walked. "Here in the city it's different, colder, lonelier. But if we don't take care of each other, who will? The government doesn't come to help these people. Companies don't care. We're all we have." Her philosophy was so simple but so profound that Sebastian felt ashamed for not understanding it before. In his corporate world, the idea was to accumulate, protect, constantly grow. Here, in this noisy and chaotic market, the idea was to circulate, share, collectively elevate. When they arrived at Elena's apartment, Javier and Sofia were studying at the small living room table. Sebastian had been visiting more frequently, helping when he could, explaining algebra to Javier using methods he remembered from his own elite education, but disguised as things I learned in school a long time ago, helping Sofia with a history project, fixing the broken fan that made the heat barely bearable. "Hey, Sebastian," Javier said that day, closing his math book. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Sure," Sebastian responded, feeling a tingle of alarm. "How did you end up on the street? I mean, you don't have to tell me if you don't want, but you're smart, you speak well, you know things, you're not like—" He stopped, searching for diplomatic words. "I'm not like other homeless people," Sebastian finished with a sad smile. "It's because it's easy to lose everything, Javier. A bad business deal, trusting the wrong person, a series of decisions that seem right at the moment but lead you to the precipice. The difference between having and not having is sometimes just a bad week." It was the truth in a certain twisted way. Ricardo trying to steal his company was that bad business deal. His decision to live as homeless was that self-imposed bad week. Javier nodded thoughtfully. "That's why I work hard in school. I don't want us to end up like that. I want to give Elena a better life so she doesn't have to work so hard. I want Sofia to go to university. You want to break the cycle," Sebastian completed. "That's admirable, but remember something. Your sister isn't sacrificing herself because she thinks her life is worthless. She does it out of love, Don't disappoint her by thinking you're a burden. You're her motivation." The words came out with more emotion than he intended, and Javier looked at him with new understanding. Elena, who had been listening from the kitchenette, dried her hands on a cloth and joined them. "Sebastian is right," she said softly, ruffling Javier's hair. "You're not burdens. You're my reason to get up every morning. Every time I'm tired, I think of your graduation, of Sophia's doctor's coat, and I find strength." The moment was so intimate that Sebastian felt like an intruder, but also deeply privileged to witness it. This family, with so little materially, possessed riches he had spent decades searching for without finding. Unconditional love, shared purpose, unbreakable hope. That night after dinner, Elena had transformed the vegetables from the market into a delicious soup that fed four with just a few pesos of ingredients. Sebastian stayed to help wash dishes. Sofia and Javier retired to their room to finish school assignments. In the small kitchen, shoulder to shoulder over the sink, Eleanor and Sebastian worked in companionable silence, but there was an electric tension in the air, something unspoken that vibrated between them like a wire stretched to maximum. "Sebastian," Elena finally said, not looking at him, concentrating intensely on drying a plate. "Yes? Do you have family? Really, I mean. I know you said no, but everyone has someone, don't they?" It was a dangerous question. Sebastian considered his options, weighed truths against lies, and chose something in between. "I had family," he said slowly. "My parents died when I was young. I was an only child. I built something. Friendships, relationships, but it turned out they were superficial. When things got complicated, when I lost what I had, everyone disappeared. I discovered I'd spent years surrounded by people but was completely alone." It was true. Every word was painfully true. Eleanor left the plate and turned toward him, her eyes searching his. "You're not alone now," she said with fierce conviction. "We're your family now if you want it. I'm your family." The declaration hung in the air between them. Sebastian felt his heart beat so hard he was sure she could hear it. Elena was inches away, her face slightly raised toward his, lips parted, breathing accelerated. It would have been so easy to close that distance, kiss her, surrender to the attraction growing between them like a climbing vine that couldn't be contained. But Sebastian restrained himself with a titanic effort of will. "Elena," he murmured, his voice hoarse. "You don't know what you're saying. You don't really know me." "I know you where it matters," she insisted. "I see how you treat my siblings, how you work honestly even when it's difficult, how you never ask for anything but always give when you can. That's what matters, not your past." But his past was a monster that would eventually devour them both if he wasn't careful. "I need to leave," Sebastian said abruptly, stepping back. "It's late. The shelter closes its doors at 11. He saw confusion and pain cross Elena's face, but she nodded. "Sure, yes, I'm sorry if I misinterpreted." "You didn't misinterpret anything," he said with more harshness than intended. "That's the problem." He left the apartment as if pursued by demons, descending the stairs two at a time, emerging into the hot night feeling as if he were drowning. On the street, he leaned against a wall and closed his eyes. He wanted Elena Jimenez. He wanted her with an intensity that scared him, that made his careful plans seem ridiculous. But he was trapped in a cage of his own construction. He couldn't have her without revealing the truth. And revealing the truth meant losing her anyway. The experiment that had begun as personal revenge had become his own torture, and he saw no way out that wouldn't result in devastating pain for everyone involved. The following weeks were a painful dance of advances and retreats. Sebastian continued seeing Elena, but maintained careful emotional distance. She perceived the change and responded with hurt confusion that transformed into determination. One afternoon she confronted him directly. They were on the roof of the building where she lived, hanging washed clothes on improvised lines. The August sun was relentless, the air dense with humidity before a storm. "What are you so afraid of, Sebastian?" Eleanor asked without preamble, driving clothespins into a sheet with movements more violent than necessary. "I don't know what you're talking about," he lied, concentrating intensely on hanging a towel. "Don't treat me like I'm stupid," she replied with ferocity. Something changed. We were fine, we were connecting, and suddenly you built a wall. Was it what I said? About you being family? Was I too forward? You weren't forward. Sebastian dropped the towel and turned toward her. You were honest, and that scares me because I can't be. What does that mean? Elena crossed her arms, defensive posture but pleading eyes. Are you still married? Do you have kids somewhere, legal problems, whatever it is, Sebastian, we can... I can't tell you, he interrupted, frustration bubbling up. It's not that simple. There are things from my past, decisions I made that would complicate everything. Life is always complicated, Elena argued, taking a step toward him. But running from complications doesn't solve them. Trust me, whatever you did, whoever you were, it doesn't matter. You matter now, the person I see in front of me. Sebastian wanted to believe her. He desperately wanted to think he could reveal his deception and she would forgive him. But he knew the truth. He had played with her life, had used her generosity as a sociological experiment. That had no forgiveness. I can't, he repeated, and the desperation in his voice was genuine. Please, Elena, don't pressure me. If you value what we have, don't dig deeper. Something in his tone stopped Elena. She studied him with eyes that saw too much, that understood more than he wanted. Finally, she nodded, slowly. Okay, she said, though it clearly wasn't. I'll respect your privacy. But Sebastian, remember this. Secrets poison relationships. Eventually, they come out. And the longer you wait, the more damage they do. It was a prophecy that would haunt him in the following days. The third month brought a crisis Sebastian hadn't anticipated. Elena was summoned to a meeting at the corporate office of one of her jobs. She returned that night, pale and trembling, her agitated hands holding a letter. They fired me, she announced without preamble when Sebastian arrived for their usual dinner. Javier and Sofia were sitting on the sofa, worried faces. What? Why? Sebastian felt cold panic. He had handled the Ramirez problem discreetly, but this was different. Budget cuts, Elena read from the letter with a hollow voice, effective immediately. 2 weeks severance, as if that were enough. Sebastian watched her world crumble in real time. This was her most stable job, the one that paid best. Losing it meant immediate financial crisis for the family. You'll get another one, he said, knowing it sounded hollow. Another one as good? Elena laughed bitterly. It took me 2 years to reach that position. Now I have to start from zero again. That night after the siblings fell asleep, Elena cried for the first time in his presence. Not dramatic sobs, but silent tears that rolled down her cheeks while she sat on the worn sofa, staring at nothing. Sebastian sat beside her and, after a moment of hesitation, put his arm around her. She collapsed against him, her body shaken by emotions she normally kept hermetically guarded. I'm so tired, she whispered against his chest. So tired of fighting. Every time I feel like we're moving forward, something pushes us back. Sometimes I think it would be easier to give up. Don't say that. Sebastian tightened his embrace, real fear coursing through his veins. You're the strongest person I know. You can't give up. Why not? Her voice sounded childish, vulnerable in ways he'd never heard. What am I proving? That I can be exploited infinitely and keep smiling? That love and kindness conquer everything when clearly they don't? It was the breaking point, the moment where hope ran out and despair entered. Sebastian recognized it because he'd been there too in his impoverished youth, when his mother's death left him alone and scared. What you're proving, he said slowly, choosing each word carefully, is that dignity doesn't require money. That true love transcends circumstances. That there are people in this world who make tomorrow a place worth waiting for because they exist. Eleanor looked up at him, eyes red but focused. Is that what you think I am? I know you're that, he responded with absolute conviction. You're the person who saved me when I was dying of hunger, literally and metaphorically. You're the reason your siblings have a future. You're the best person I've known. Something changed in the air between them. Eleanor raised a hand and touched his face, tracing the line of his jaw with rough but infinitely gentle fingers. Sebastian, she murmured, I don't know who you were before, I don't know what secrets you keep, but I know this. I'm falling in love with you, and that terrifies me almost as much as losing you. It was the moment. He could confess everything now, in this vulnerable instant where she might be more inclined to understand, to forgive. The words crowded in his throat, fighting to get out. But what he said was, "Me too. I'm falling in love with you." And then he kissed her. It was a kiss of desperation and contained longing, of months of tension releasing, of two lonely people finding refuge in each other's arms. Elena responded with equal intensity, her fingers tangling in his hair, her body pressing against his as if she could melt into him. When they finally separated, both were breathing heavily. Elena rested her forehead against his. "No matter what comes," she whispered, "we'll face it together, okay?" "Okay," Sebastian lied, knowing he was digging his grave deeper with each word. That night, after saying goodbye with stolen kisses on the dark landing, Sebastian walked through the streets not toward the shelter, but toward a cheap hotel where he paid cash for a room. He needed to be alone, needed to think. He looked at himself in the stained bathroom mirror. The man looking back was unrecognizable. Thin, bearded, eyes with depth that hadn't existed 3 months ago. He had changed physically, but the internal change was deeper. He loved Elena Jimenez. He loved her in a way that made his entire successful past seem hollow and meaningless. But he had built their relationship on a fundamental lie. He wasn't the homeless man she believed. He was a multimillionaire playing at poverty, using her life as an experiment. What was the right move? Confess and risk losing her? Continue the lie and build a future on foundations of deception? Disappear, letting her think he had moved on but saving her from the pain of betrayal? No option was good. All led to pain. Sebastian collapsed on the cheap bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, and for the first time in decades, prayed to a God he wasn't sure he believed in, asking for wisdom he knew he didn't deserve. The 4th month passed in a kind of suspended time, where each day was perfect and terrible simultaneously. Elena had found a new job quickly, cleaning at a shopping center, though it paid less than the previous one. Sebastian increased his own work hours, taking anything available so he could contribute more with food. Small gifts for Javier and Sofia, money he discreetly slipped into Elena's bag when she wasn't looking. Their relationship flourished like a flower in impossible conditions. They stole moments together, walks in the park early in the morning before their respective jobs, shared dinners where each bite tasted better because they shared it, whispered conversations in the darkness of the rooftop when they couldn't sleep. But the cracks were beginning to appear, small fissures in his carefully constructed facade. One day, while helping Javier with a history project about 20th century industrialists, Sebastian made the mistake of providing too specific details about corporate strategies. Javier looked at him with curiosity. "How do you know so much about business?" he asked. "I thought you said you lost everything recently." Sebastian had to improvise. "I read a lot. Library books. I was always fascinated by business, ironically. All that information didn't save me from my own bad decisions." Javier accepted the explanation, but Sebastian saw doubt in his eyes. The boy was intelligent, perceptive. How much longer before he started connecting inconsistencies? Another time, an old acquaintance from Sebastian's corporate circles almost recognized him on the street. She was an executive with whom he'd had meetings years ago. She passed by him, did a double take, and stopped. Sebastian held his breath, preparing for disaster. But she simply shook her head, clearly thinking it was impossible for Sebastian Marquez to be dressed in rags in this poor neighborhood. She kept walking, and Sebastian exhaled with trembling relief. Elena noticed his tension. "Are you okay? You look scared." "Just tired," he lied. "It was a long week." The biggest lie came when Elena announced she had found something in one of the buildings she cleaned, an old newspaper article about missing businessmen. There was a small section about how some successful executives sometimes had nervous breakdowns and voluntarily disappeared. "Can you imagine it?" Elena said, reading the article during lunch. "Having all that money, all that power, and still feeling so miserable that you want to disappear. It must be horrible to live such an empty life that you'd rather be nobody than be yourself." Her words were a knife that twisted in Sebastian's heart, because that was exactly what he had done. He'd had everything and felt such a deep emptiness that he preferred poverty cosplay to facing his own hollow existence. "Maybe," he said carefully, "it's not that they wanted to be nobody. Maybe they wanted to discover who they were without all the things that defined them. Elena looked at him thoughtfully. Is that what you're doing? Discovering yourself? The question was too close to the truth. Something like that, he admitted. Well, she took his hand over the table, her fingers naturally intertwining with his. I hope that when you finish discovering yourself, you still want to stay here. With me. Always, Sebastian promised, and it was simultaneously the deepest truth and the biggest lie he'd told. But the universe has ways of exposing secrets. One afternoon, while Sebastian was making deliveries for his courier job, he had to take a package to a corporate building that turned out to be owned by a subsidiary of his own company. While waiting in the lobby, he saw news screens transmitting financial reports. And there was Ricardo Villamil, his traitor ex-friend, giving a press conference about his emerging political campaign. He talked about helping the poor, about social responsibility, about economic justice. Every word was poison disguised as honey. Sebastian felt ancient fury resurging. This man was stealing his corporate legacy while building a political career on lies, and Sebastian couldn't do anything without revealing his own imposture. Or could he? That night, Sebastian made a dangerous decision. He used a cyber cafe to anonymously contact an investigative journalist he knew from his previous life. He provided clues about Ricardo's questionable legal maneuvers, enough to start an investigation, but not so much as to reveal his own identity. It was risky. If the journalist followed the right threads, it could lead back to Sebastian. But he felt he couldn't stand still, while Ricardo used his theft as a springboard to political power. Meanwhile, his relationship with Elena deepened in ways that terrified him. She had begun talking about the future. Maybe they could save together, eventually get a better apartment, build something. She spoke with cautious hope about the possibility of Sebastian living with them if things continued improving. I know it soon, she said one night, cuddled on the sofa after Javier and Sofia fell asleep. But I can imagine a life with you. A real life. Not just this transitional thing. Can you? Sebastian kissed her instead of responding with words, because anything he said would be another layer of deception. He could imagine it perfectly, waking next to her every morning, building a life of honest simplicity, being part of this family that had accepted him without conditions. But that future was fantasy. He was Sebastian Marquez, multimillionaire. He had a corporation to run, employees who depended on him, an empire to defend. He couldn't simply abandon that permanently, no matter how tempting. The 5th month arrived with a sense of suffocating inevitability. Sebastian knew something had to give. His double life was unsustainable, the lies multiplying like hydras, each one generating 2 more. One day, while walking alone, lost in tortured thoughts, he literally bumped into someone. When he apologized and looked up, his heart stopped. It was Fernando, his executive vice president, one of the few in his inner circle who knew about his experiment, though not the details. Fernando looked at him, eyes widening with recognition and incredulity. He opened his mouth to speak, but Sebastian shook his head violently, a desperate gesture of silence. Fernando, always loyal, understood. He closed his mouth, nodded briefly, and kept walking as if he'd seen nothing. But the encounter left Sebastian trembling. The walls were closing in. He couldn't maintain this charade forever. Soon, somehow, the truth would explode. And when it did, it would destroy everything he'd built with Elena. That night, sleeping on his cot at the shelter, Sebastian had a vivid nightmare. Elena discovering who he really was, the betrayal in her eyes more painful than any physical blow. She screamed at him that he had played with her life, that he had turned her real struggle into entertainment for a bored rich man, that she could never, ever forgive him. He woke sweating, heart galloping, and he knew with horrible certainty that the nightmare was prophetic. The crash was coming. It was only a matter of time. The 6th month brought with it the neighborhood's traditional festivities, an annual celebration that transformed grey streets into a kaleidoscope of colors, music, and life. Elena was excited, dragging Sebastian to planning meetings where neighbors debated decorations, food, and entertainment with the seriousness of generals planning a military campaign. It's important, Elena explained while hanging Papel Picado flags between light posts. It's the only time of year when we all forget our problems and are just community. Children who normally can't afford toys win prizes. Families who barely have enough to eat enjoy a feast. It's magical. Sebastian watched fascinated as the neighborhood transformed. Elderly ladies brought out their best recipes, saved all year for this occasion. Men built improvised stalls with recycled wood and pure creativity. Children painted murals on walls, spontaneous art that spoke of hope and joy amid adversity. But the most striking thing for Sebastian was the contribution system. Nobody had much, but everyone gave something. One family contributed 10 kilos of rice, another lent their large pots, someone else offered their time as a musician. It was an economy of reciprocity that worked because everyone understood the unwritten rule: today for you, tomorrow for me. My grandmother always said, Elena shared while preparing tamales alongside 3 neighbors in the improvised communal kitchen, that true wealth is in how many hands extend when you fall. In the village, when someone needed to build a house, everyone came. When there was a wedding, everyone cooked. When someone died, everyone cried. We were poor in pesos but rich in humanity. Her words resonated in Sebastian with devastating force. He had built an empire based on competition, on winning at all costs, on individual accumulation. This system, based on cooperation, on collectively elevating, on sharing generously, was completely opposite, and it worked in ways his corporate model never could. The festival day arrived sunny and warm. The streets were closed to traffic, transformed into a vibrant market of food, crafts, children's games, and live music. Sebastian walked alongside Elena, his hand firmly intertwined with hers, feeling for the first time in his adult life that he belonged to something bigger than himself. Javier had organized a chess tournament for the neighborhood's youth, using donated boards and mismatched but functional pieces. Sophia helped with face painting for small children, transforming them into butterflies, tigers, and superheroes with cheap paints, but applied with love. Everything was perfect, too perfect. And then Sebastian saw him. Ricardo Villamil appeared like a nightmare apparition, surrounded by a retinue of assistants and photographers. He wore casual clothes carefully selected to seem of the people, designer jeans artificially aged, wrinkled linen shirt in a studied way, shoes that probably cost more than 3 families' monthly income in the neighborhood. "Friends," Ricardo declared with a rehearsed smile, arms extended as if to embrace the entire crowd. "What joy to be here with you on this day of community celebration. As a congressional candidate, I want you to know that your voices matter, that your struggles are my struggles." It was a political speech disguised as solidarity. Sebastian felt bile rise in his throat, but he stayed in the shadows, head down, beard acting as a useful disguise. Eleanor, however, was fascinated. She approached with other neighbors, listening while Ricardo promised improvements for the neighborhood. New schools, jobs, medical services. Everything sounded wonderful, all lies wrapped in shiny paper. "This man really cares," Elena whispered to Sebastian when she returned. "He says he grew up poor, that he understands our struggles. Maybe we finally have someone who will fight for us." Sebastian wanted to scream. He wanted to tell her that Ricardo was a fraud, a thief, a hypocrite who hadn't known a day of true poverty in his privileged life. But he couldn't without revealing how he knew all that. "Be careful," was all he could say. "Politicians promise many things during campaigns." "You're very cynical," Eleanor responded, but without malice. "Sometimes you have to have faith in people's goodness." The irony was so sharp it hurt physically. Worse still, Ricardo announced a generous donation to the neighborhood committee. Enough money to repair the dilapidated playground where children played. The crowd applauded, grateful and hopeful. Sebastian watched in horror as his worst enemy positioned himself as savior of these people who had become so precious to him. After the speech, while Ricardo made his political rounds shaking hands and kissing babies, his eyes crossed with Sebastian's for a fraction of a second. There was a moment of confusion on Ricardo's face, something familiar in that bearded and poorly dressed man, but then it passed, dismissing the similarity as impossible coincidence. Sebastian exhaled, dodging another bullet. But that night, lying on his cot, he processed what he'd seen. Ricardo was using this neighborhood, these real people with real struggles, as stepping stones for his political ambition, and Sebastian couldn't stop him without destroying his own cover. The moral dilemma gnawed at him. What was more important, maintaining his experiment or protecting this community that had welcomed him? His personal pride or Eleanor and her neighbors' well-being? For the first time, Sebastian seriously considered ending everything, revealing his identity, using his resources to expose Ricardo, and facing the consequences with Elena. But fear paralyzed him. Fear of seeing love turn to hate in her eyes. Fear of losing the only genuine thing he'd had in decades. So he stayed silent. And that cowardice would be the first domino in a chain of events that would soon escape completely from his control. The 7th month began with news that left the neighborhood in shock. The building where Elena lived, along with 3 other residential blocks in the area, had been sold to a real estate development company. The new owners planned to demolish the structures and build a luxury condominium complex. Current residents had 60 days to vacate. Elena arrived at the restaurant that day with the eviction notice in trembling hands. Sebastian read it with growing horror while she spoke stumblingly, words coming out like a cascade of panic. "I don't understand. We've been living here 12 years. The previous owner always said he'd never sell, that he understood we were families, that this was our home. How could he do this without warning us? Where are we going to go? Apartments in other parts of the city cost double. I can't pay that and keep Javier and Sofia in school. I don't know what to do." Sebastian studied the document, his legal training automatically identifying clauses and corporate language, and then he saw the development company's name, Marquez Development LLC, a subsidiary of his own corporate empire. The world tilted violently. This was his fault. He had approved this acquisition 6 months before his experiment, a cold business decision made in a climate-controlled boardroom, numbers on a spreadsheet, profit projections versus cost. He had never considered that those numbers represented real families, real lives that would be displaced. Elena and her siblings were being evicted by his own company. The irony was so cruel, he almost laughed hysterically. "Sebastian, are you okay? You look pale." Elena's voice brought him back. "I'm fine," he lied automatically. It's a lot to process." During the following weeks, Sebastian watched helplessly while the community mobilized. Elena became leader of a residents' committee, organizing meetings, creating petitions, contacting tenant rights groups. Her determination was fierce and beautiful, but Sebastian knew the truth. Legally, the developers had every right to do exactly what they planned. Unless someone with real power intervened, Sebastian spent nights awake, tortured by impossible choices. He could make a call, give an order, and the project would be cancelled instantly. But doing so would reveal who he was. He could stay silent and let Eleanor and dozens of families be displaced, but that meant allowing his own company to cause massive harm to innocent people. There was no good option. All roads led to disaster. It was Javier who accidentally precipitated the crisis. The young man, researching for the Residents' Committee, began tracing Marquez Development's corporate structure. He was intelligent, meticulous, motivated to protect his family. He found connections, patterns, names. One night, Sebastian arrived at the apartment to find Javier surrounded by papers printed from the library, hand-drawn diagrams connecting companies. "Look at this," Javier said excitedly, not noticing the sudden tension in Sebastian's body. "The company evicting us is a subsidiary of Marquez Corporation. And guess who's on Marquez Corporation's board of directors? Ricardo Villamil, that politician who came to the festival." "What?" Elena approached, reading over her brother's shoulder. "But he promised to help us. He said he'd fight against this type of eviction." "Gets worse," Javier continued. "I found old articles. Turns out the original owner of Marquez Corporation, a certain Sebastian Marquez, disappeared months ago. Nobody knows where he is. And since then, Villamil has been consolidating power, making unilateral decisions. There are rumors he's trying to take complete control of the company." The name fell like a bomb in the room. Sebastian felt the room spin, oxygen evacuating from his lungs. Elena turned toward him slowly. "Sebastian," she said with a strange voice. "What a coincidence, you share a name with this missing businessman." "It's a common name," he responded, but his voice sounded hollow, even to his own ears. Something changed in Elena's expression. Sebastian saw her mind working, connecting dots he had kept carefully separated. His unusual business knowledge, his educated manners that sometimes escaped, his apparent appearance in the neighborhood coinciding with the businessman's disappearance, small inconsistencies she had ignored because she trusted him. "No," she murmured, stepping back. "No, it can't be." "Elena," Sebastian began, real panic flooding him. "Javier, search for a photo of Sebastian Marquez," Elena ordered, voice trembling. "Find it now." Javier, confused but obedient, typed quickly. Seconds later, his tablet showed an image. Sebastian Marquez at a corporate event, clean-shaven, designer suit, confident and arrogant expression. Despite the beard, longer hair and ragged clothes, the similarities were unmistakable. Elena took the tablet with trembling hands. She looked at the photo, looked at Sebastian, back at the photo. Her face transitioned through a dozen emotions: confusion, understanding, disbelief, devastating betrayal. "My God," she whispered, "it's you. All this time, you're him." Sophia emerged from the bedroom, sensing the tension. "What's happening?" "Leave," Elena said with a broken voice, without taking her eyes off Sebastian. "Javier, Sophia, go to the room, now." The siblings, frightened by Elena's tone, quickly obeyed, closing the door behind them. The silence that followed was deafening. Elena simply looked at him, tears beginning to roll down her cheeks, breathing accelerated. "Tell me it's not true," she finally pleaded. "Tell me it's a mistake, a crazy coincidence, please." Sebastian opened his mouth, but lies no longer came. He could no longer sustain the charade. The house of cards he had built so carefully for months collapsed in an instant. "It's true," he admitted, voice barely a whisper. "I'm Sebastian Marquez, and Elena, He got no further. Elena's hand slapped him with a force he didn't know she possessed, the sound resonating in the small apartment like a gunshot. "How dare you?" Her voice was pure venom. "How dare you come here, into my life, into my family, and play with us as if we were your experiments? What were we to you, entertainment? A way to feel better about yourself? It wasn't like that. Did my poverty amuse you? Was my struggle picturesque for you? I gave you my food. I gave you my trust. I gave you my—" Her voice broke. "I gave you my heart. And it was all a lie." "My love for you was never a lie," Sebastian said desperately. "Everything else, yes, I lie about everything else. But what I feel for you, Elena, that's the realest thing I've had in my life." "Don't say my name," she spat. "You have no right. You know what's the worst? I'm not even being evicted by some faceless corporate entity. I'm being evicted by your company, by you. You came here, let me fall in love with you, knowing all along that your own company was going to destroy my home." "I didn't know," Sebastian protested. "The decision was made before all this started. When I found out, I was as horrified as you. I've been trying to find a way to fix it without revealing your precious secret identity?" Elena laughed bitterly. Poor Millionaire, such difficult dilemmas. "Meanwhile, I was worried about where the hell we'll live, how I'll keep my siblings in school, if we'll end up on the street. But I guess that didn't really matter to you, did it? Because you always had your way out, your mansion waiting, your fortune intact." Every word was a knife, and Sebastian felt them all. "Please, let me explain." "Leave," Elena interrupted, voice cold now, tears drying in salty paths down her cheeks. "Leave my house, leave my life, and this time, when you pretend to be someone else, maybe choose a victim who's not stupid enough to believe you." "Elena, please, leave," she screamed, with a force that made the walls shudder. "If at any moment you had any respect for me, for what we shared, leave now, because if you stay one more second, I don't know what I'm capable of." Sebastian knew when a battle was lost. He headed to the door in a state of shock, body moving by muscle memory. At the threshold, he turned for one last plea. "I'm sorry," he said, and he had never meant two words more deeply in his life. "I'm sorry for everything, But Elena, please believe me. Loving you was the only real and true thing I've done in years. She turned, giving him her back. Real love isn't built on lies. Now leave. Sebastian descended the stairs feeling as if he were in a dream or a nightmare. His feet carried him to the streets. His eyes saw without processing. He walked aimlessly for hours, the entire world grey and meaningless. He had lost everything. Not his money, not his company, but something infinitely more valuable. He had lost Eleanor. He had lost her respect, her trust, her love. And the worst was that he deserved every drop of her fury. Sebastian didn't return to the shelter that night. Instead, he walked to a cheap hotel in a different neighborhood, paid for a small room, and locked himself in. For 2 complete days, he didn't eat, barely drank water, simply sat on the bed staring at the wall while his mind replayed the moment of discovery over and over. The 3rd day, the hotel owner knocked on his door, worried. Sebastian assured him he was fine, asked to stay another week, and paid cash from the money he had saved working. It was in that lonely room where Sebastian finally broke down completely. He cried for the first time in decades, deep sobs that shook his entire body, years of repressed emotions flowing like a broken dam. He cried for Elena, for the family he had lost, for the person he could have been if he hadn't let ambition and pride consume him. But he also gained clarity. In that room, stripped of pretenses, he faced uncomfortable truths about himself. He had begun this experiment for the wrong reasons. Revenge, pride, need to prove his superiority. But along the way he had found something he didn't know he was searching for: genuine humanity, unconditional love, real community. Eleanor had taught him that wealth wasn't money but connection, that strength wasn't power but vulnerability, that success wasn't accumulation but generosity. And he had destroyed all those lessons with his lies. On the 5th day of isolation, Sebastian made a decision. He wouldn't return to his mansion, wouldn't flee to his previous life with his tail between his legs. If Elena could never forgive him, at least he'd demonstrate that his transformation had been real, that it hadn't just been a game. He shaved his beard completely for the first time in months. He bathed meticulously. He used his personal credit card, untouched during his entire experiment, to buy new but simple clothes: clean jeans, a basic shirt, comfortable shoes. Not expensive clothes, just decent clothes. Then he made a series of phone calls from the hotel room phone. The first was to Fernando, his vice president. "Sebastian, thank God." Fernando sounded relieved and exasperated. "We've been trying to contact you for weeks. The situation with Villamil has deteriorated. He's moving pieces for a complete corporate coup. We need you to come back now." "I'll return," Sebastian confirmed. "But not as I was before. There are changes to make first. Cancel the residential development project in the East District. All of them. Immediately." "What?" "Sebastian, those projects represent millions in projected profits." "I don't care," Sebastian interrupted firmly. "Those are real families being displaced. I won't do it. Find another way. Buy the buildings and convert them into housing cooperatives. Current residents become co-owners. Structure affordable payments based on income." There was stunned silence. "That's radically different from our usual strategy." "Our usual strategy was cruel," Sebastian responded. "Implement the changes and Fernando investigate all our other properties. Any project that displaces vulnerable communities gets restructured or cancelled, non-negotiable." After hanging up with Fernando, Sebastian made more calls. To his lawyers, initiating lawsuits against Ricardo for corporate fraud, embezzlement, and breach of trust. To the investigative journalist, providing complete evidence of Ricardo's activities, withholding nothing. To his accountant, establishing community funds for neighborhoods affected by his previous projects. Each action was a step toward redemption. It wouldn't fix everything, wouldn't make him forgivable in Elena's eyes, but it was right. When he finally left the hotel a week after the disaster, Sebastian didn't return immediately to his mansion. Instead, he went back to the neighborhood. Not to Elena's apartment, he knew he wasn't welcome, but to the streets where he had spent months, to the community that had welcomed him as one of them. News that the eviction project had been cancelled had already arrived. Residents were celebrating in small groups, incredulous but relieved. Sebastian watched from the shadows, unseen. He saw Eleanor leave her building, surrounded by neighbors congratulating her for her leadership in the protest. She smiled, but Sebastian noticed the smile didn't reach her eyes. There was a sadness in her posture that hadn't been there before, and knowing he was the cause of that hurt more than any physical blow. Javier and Sofia were with her. Sebastian watched them laugh, embrace their neighborhood friends, clearly relieved that their home was safe. They deserved that security. Elena deserved that peace. Sebastian turned to leave, but a voice stopped him. "I know you're there." It was Eleanor. She was standing a few meters away, had left the celebration to confront him. Her expression was hard to read, not furious like before, but not gentle either. "I didn't come to bother you," Sebastian said quickly. "I just wanted to see that you were okay. I'm leaving now." "I heard what you did," Elena said, crossing her arms. "The project cancellation, the corporate restructuring, the lawsuits against Villa Mille. The whole neighborhood is talking about it." "I should have done it from the beginning," Sebastian responded simply. "It doesn't cancel what I did, but it was right." Elena studied him in silence for a long, uncomfortable moment. "Why?" she finally asked. "Why did you come here in the first place? I need to understand." Sebastian took a deep breath. "Because Ricardo, the man trying to steal my company, was my best friend in childhood. He humiliated me when we were kids for being poor. And when he tried to destroy everything I built, I wanted to prove to him, prove to myself, that my success wasn't luck. That even without money, I was still capable. So it was about ego," Elena concluded. "It started that way," Sebastian admitted, "but it became something more. I met you. I met your siblings. I saw how people really live, without the filters of my boardrooms and corporate reports. I fell in love. Not with the experiment, not with picturesque poverty, but with you. With your strength, your generosity, your humanity. I fell in love, and it terrified me, because it meant I'd eventually have to confess." "And yet you waited until you had no choice," Elena pointed out. "Yes," he didn't try to deny it. "I was a coward. I feared losing you more than I valued your right to truth. That was unforgivable." Elena exhaled slowly. "I need time, Sebastian. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. What you did was, it was so deeply wrong. You played with my life, with my siblings' lives. You turned us into your personal experiment." "I know." Sebastian felt tears threatening again. "And if I could undo it, I would, but I can't. I can only promise that I've changed, that the person I pretended to be, the man who helped you and learned from you, that was more real than the businessman I'd been for decades." "Promises are cheap," Elena said, but her voice had softened slightly. "Real changes require time, years, not months." "I have time," Sebastian responded. "All the time you need. And if in the end you decide you can't forgive me, I'll accept it. Just know that you were the one who showed me how to be human again, and that will never change, no matter what happens between us." Elena looked at him for one more moment, then nodded slowly. "Goodbye, Sebastian Marquez." She turned and walked back toward her family, her community, her life of which he was no longer part. Sebastian stood on the street, watching her walk away, and knew he had lost something irreplaceable. But he also knew that the man he had been before wouldn't have felt this loss so deeply. That man would have moved on, found another distraction, buried the pain under work and ambition. This man, the one Eleanor had helped create, felt every drop of that loss. And that, in a strange way, was progress. The next 2 months were a battle on 2 fronts. Professionally, Sebastian fought Ricardo with ruthless ferocity. The lawsuits revealed fraud schemes that went deeper than he imagined. Ricardo had been embezzling funds, falsifying documents, bribing officials. The evidence was overwhelming, and when it finally became public, Ricardo's political career disintegrated like paper in fire. But that victory felt hollow. Sebastian had recovered his company. But at what cost? Personally, Sebastian began the hard work of reconstruction, not of his fortune, that had never been in real danger, but of his soul. He didn't return to his mansion. Instead, he sold it and used the profits to establish an affordable housing fund. He moved to a modest apartment, not in Elena's neighborhood, but not in the luxury zone where he used to live either. Something in between, a physical reflection of who he was trying to become. He completely restructured Marquez Corporation. He implemented dignified wages at all levels. He created training programs for workers without formal education. He established cooperatives where employees became co-owners. His board of directors thought he'd lost his mind, but Sebastian no longer made decisions based on quarterly profits. He made decisions based on whether he could look at himself in the mirror without shame. He also began therapy. He found a psychologist who worked with people in identity crisis, and during brutally honest weekly sessions, he unpacked decades of trauma, toxic ambition, and deeply buried fear. "You built an identity completely based on being rich and successful," his therapist explained during one session. "When you pretend to be poor, you're not just experiencing poverty, you're experiencing the terror of losing the only identity you knew. Elena loved you without that identity, and that terrified you because it meant your true self might be lovable without your achievements." It was true, and working through that was painful but necessary. Sebastian also maintained respectful distance from Elena's neighborhood, but found other ways to help. Anonymous funds to improve schools, scholarships for students like Javier and Sofia, microcredit programs for local entrepreneurs. He never sought recognition, never let them know it came from him. It was Doña Marta from the restaurant who finally sought him out. Sebastian had been avoiding El Fogón, too many memories, but one day he received a cryptic message to meet her there. When he arrived, the robust owner looked at him with eyes that saw too much. "Sit down, boy," she ordered, placing a plate of food in front of him without asking if he wanted anything. "Doña Marta, Shut up and eat," she interrupted. "Then we'll talk." Sebastian obeyed, eating the familiar food that tasted like home, like forgiveness he didn't deserve, like memory that hurt. When he finished, Doña Marta sat across from him, rough hands folded on the table. "Elena told me everything," she said directly, "about who you are, what you did." Sebastian nodded, waiting for deserved condemnation. "That was monumental stupidity," Doña Marta continued without compassion. "One of the dumbest things I've heard, playing with real lives like that." "I know. But," and her tone softened slightly, "I also see what you've been doing since then. The changes in your company, the lawsuits against that pig Villamil, the improvements in the neighborhood. You think nobody knows it comes from you, but I have eyes everywhere, boy." Sebastian looked at her, surprised. "I've been in this neighborhood 30 years, Doña Marta explained. I've seen politicians promise the sky and deliver nothing. I've seen businessmen do charity for photos, then disappear. But you, arrogant idiot that you are really trying to change. Without cameras, without applause, that means something." "It doesn't make up for what I did," Sebastian said. "No, it doesn't," Doña Marta agreed. "But real repentance isn't about erasing the past. It's about building a different future. The question is, are you doing this to impress Elena, or because you really changed?" Sebastian considered carefully. "It started being about Elena," he admitted. "But now I do it because I can't go back to being who I was. That man is dead, and the man I am now can't live with exploitation and cruelty, even if it's legal, even if it's profitable." Doña Marta nodded, satisfied. "Good, because I need to tell you something. Elena is suffering." Sebastian's heart squeezed. "Is she okay? Her siblings?" "They're fine materially, but Elena, she loved you, boy. Really loved you. And that betrayal hurt her deeper than anything she's faced. I've seen her go hungry and smile, but since you left, there's a sadness in her that won't go away." "What can I do?" Sebastian asked desperately. "She said she needed time. I've been giving her space." "Keep giving space," Doña Marta advised. "But maybe eventually, when enough time has passed, try talking again. Really this time. Without secrets, without disguises. Just brutal honesty. If there's any chance you'll work, it'll be built on that." "What if she tells me to leave forever?" The possibility terrified him. "Then you respect that," Doña Marta said simply. "Real love means wanting the best for the other person, even if it doesn't include you." Sebastian absorbed her words. "Thank you, Doña Marta, for not hating me." She laughed dryly. "Oh, I hated you for weeks. I yelled at your photo in the newspaper when the story came out, But then I saw Elena was also miserable, and I thought, these two idiots deserve each other if they can work it out. It was the closest to a blessing he'd receive. When Sebastian left the restaurant that afternoon, he felt the smallest spark of hope. He didn't trust it. There was still so much to repair, but it was there, faint but persistent. Maybe, just maybe, the love he had found wasn't lost forever. Just sleeping, waiting to see if the person who claimed to be changed could really sustain that transformation. Time would tell. The 8th month arrived with change of season, colder air announcing autumn. Sebastian had established a new routine, worked from home mostly, attended corporate meetings only when absolutely necessary, and spent afternoons doing volunteer work at community organizations. It was at one of these volunteer events, a job fair for displaced people, where he saw Javier. The young man was helping at an educational orientation booth, patiently explaining scholarship options to attendees. When their eyes met, Javier visibly tensed. Sebastian considered leaving, but Javier approached during a break. "Hello," Javier said, not hostile but not warm either. "Hello, Javier," Sebastian responded carefully. "I didn't know you'd be here. If you want me to leave—" "No," Javier interrupted. "You have a right to do volunteer work. This isn't Elena's territory." There was an acknowledgement there that Elena owned certain spaces, a family loyalty that Sebastian deeply respected. They worked in uncomfortable silence for a while, until Javier finally spoke. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Were you honest about anything? When you helped us with homework, when you fixed things in the apartment, when you talked to me about my future, was any of that real?" The question hit like a punch. "All of that was real," Sebastian responded fervently. "I lied about who I was, but not about caring. When I said I was proud of your dedication to your studies, I meant it. When I fixed things, I did it because I genuinely wanted to help. The person I was with your family, that was the most authentic version of me I've been in decades." Javier processed this. "Elena doesn't talk about you. Sophia is furious on her behalf, but I don't know what to think. I liked you. I trusted you. And discovering it was all acting was devastating." "It wasn't acting," Sebastian insisted. "It was deception about context, but not about emotions. Javier, you reminded me why it matters to work hard, study, have ambition. But you also taught me that ambition should be about elevating others, not just yourself. That lesson changed how I run my company now." Javier studied him with the intensity of someone trying to read truth in a sea of past lies. "I heard about the changes you made. New corporate policies, Villamil being arrested. The neighborhood is better thanks to you, though nobody wants to admit it, because it means forgiving you." "They don't need to forgive me," Sebastian said. "Doing the right thing doesn't require absolution. I do it because it's right, period." "Do you love my sister?" The question was direct, typical of Javier. "More than anything in my life," Sebastian responded without hesitation. "But I don't deserve a second chance, I understand that." Javier nodded slowly. "Good. Because if you thought you deserved automatic forgiveness, then you really wouldn't have changed." He paused. "Elena is considering opening her cleaning cooperative. The loan was approved. She's going to do it." Sebastian's heart leaped. "That's amazing. She's going to be brilliant at it." "I know," Javier smiled with fierce pride, "but she's scared. And I think part of that is because she doesn't have someone she trusts to talk about it with. It used to be you. Now that space is empty." It was a gift, that information. A small bridge extended. "Thank you for telling me," Sebastian said. Before Javier left, he turned. "Sebastian, I can't speak for Elena, but I can say this. If you've really changed, if you really are the person you claim to be now, don't give up. Prove it. Not with words or money, but with consistent actions, for months, years if necessary. And maybe, just maybe, eventually she'll see what Doña Marta and I are starting to see." "What's that?" "That people can change, if they're willing to do the work." That conversation gave Sebastian renewed courage, not to rush reconciliation, but to continue his path of authentic transformation, no matter how long it took. 3 weeks later, Sebastian received an unexpected invitation, The grand opening of Cooperativa de Limpieza Esperanza, Elena's business. The invitation was probably generic, sent to dozens of community contacts, but Sebastian held it like it was gold. The attending would be risky. It might upset Elena. But not going meant missing a fundamental moment in her life, the fulfillment of the dream she had shared with him months ago. On opening day, Sebastian arrived early, when the newly renovated space was still empty, except for Elena and a few helpers preparing. The space was small but cheerful. Walls painted sunny yellow, photos of women from the neighborhood who would be the first cooperativists, a counter with information about ethical and ecological cleaning services. Elena was hanging a sign when she saw him. She stopped, marker still in hand, expression passing through surprise to defensive caution. "Hello," Sebastian said softly from the door. "I got the invitation. If you want me to leave, I will. I just wanted to see you achieve this. I'm so proud of you." Elena slowly lowered the marker. "How did you know?" "The invitation only said the address. Javier mentioned you were opening. No details, just that it was happening." "My brother and his big mouth," Elena muttered, but without real anger. She descended from the ladder, keeping safe distance from Sebastian. "Why did you come?" "Because when you told me about this dream months ago, I saw your whole soul in that vision. Seeing that you made it reality against all odds it's beautiful, Elena. And I wanted to be here to witness it, even if from the shadows." Elena studied him, something working behind her eyes. "It's been time." 2 months, 1 week, 3 days, Sebastian responded automatically, then blushed. "Not that I'm obsessively counting." Despite herself, Elena smiled slightly. "I heard things. About changes in Marquez Corporation, about Villamil being prosecuted, about anonymous funds that suddenly appeared for community projects. I'm trying to fix what I can," Sebastian said simply. "For me or for you?" It was the central question. Sebastian had known it would come eventually. "It started for you," he admitted honestly. "But it became something more. You looked at me with such contempt when you discovered who I was. Deserved. Completely deserved. But it made me see how I'd been living, extracting value from vulnerable people, justifying it as business. I couldn't keep being that person. Not after knowing you, learning from you." "Nice speech," Elena said, but her tone was more curious than cynical. "It's not a speech, it's truth." Sebastian took a breath. "Elena, I'm not here to ask forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I came because this is your triumph, and even though I'm no longer part of your life, I still celebrate each of your successes. You can't take that right from me." Elena looked at him for a long moment. "Doña Marta says you've been going to therapy." "Your information network is impressive," Sebastian noted. "Yes, I go to therapy. Unpacking decades of garbage. It's brutal but necessary." "And what does your therapist say about coming here today?" "That I respect your boundaries, that I don't invade your space, that if you ask me to leave, I go immediately." Sebastian stepped toward the door. "So if you want me to leave—" "Wait," Elena stopped him. She took a trembling breath. "I'm scared, Sebastian." "Of the business?" "Of everything, of the business, of trusting again, of still feeling things for you even after what you did. I'm furious with myself for that." Sebastian's heart beat painfully. It's normal to feel contradictory things. "I don't want to feel this," Elena continued, voice breaking slightly. "It would be so much easier to hate you completely, but I see the changes you made. I see real effort, and I hate that part of me wants to believe you could be different." "I am different," Sebastian said fervently. "But I understand why you can't trust that yet. Trust requires time, consistent proof, and I've only had 2 months to demonstrate it." "What do you want from me?" Elena asked directly. "Nothing," Sebastian responded honestly. "Absolutely nothing. I didn't come to ask for a second chance. I came because I couldn't imagine this important day in your life without at least being present, even as a stranger in the crowd. If that's all I can be to you now, I accept it." Elena looked at him with eyes bright with unshed tears. "You're not a stranger. I wish you were. Strangers don't break your heart." "I know. I'm sorry. I'll always be sorry." "I know," Elena whispered. The moment stretched between them, charged with everything that had been and everything that might have been. "Understood," Sebastian nodded, immense gratitude flooding him. "Thank you for letting me share this moment." When the official opening began, hours later, Sebastian stayed in the back, watching Elena shine as she explained her vision to visitors, hired her first clients, celebrated with the women who formed her cooperative. She was radiant, powerful, completely in her element. And Sebastian realized something. He loved her enough to celebrate her success, even if he never again became part of her intimate life. That was real love. Not possessive, not conditional, but generous and free. When the night ended and guests dispersed, Eleanor walked toward where Sebastian still waited. "Thank you for coming," she said formally. "Thank you for letting me," he responded with equal formality. They looked at each other, worlds of unspoken words floating between them. "I need time," Elena repeated. "You have all the time in the world," Sebastian promised. "And when you're ready to talk, if you're ever ready, I'll be here, waiting, without expectations, without pressure, just here." Elena nodded, then did something unexpected. She leaned in and kissed his cheek softly. "Goodbye, Sebastian." "See you later, Eleanor." It wasn't goodbye forever. It was see you later. And that was more hope than he dared to dream. The 9th month brought an unusually cold winter. Sebastian had continued his transformation, each day building on the previous. His company was almost unrecognizable. Full benefits for all employees, democratic decision-making structures, regular social impact audits. Profits had decreased slightly, but employee loyalty and morale had exploded. Ricardo Villamil had been sentenced to 5 years in prison for fraud and embezzlement. His political career was destroyed, his reputation in ruins. Sebastian had expected to feel vengeful satisfaction, but only felt emptiness. Revenge was a poor motivation that left ash in the mouth. One afternoon, Sebastian received an unexpected call from Sophia. "I need to talk to you," the teenager said without preamble. "In person." They met at a neutral cafe, far from Elena's neighborhood. Sophia arrived with an expression serious beyond her 14 years. "Thank you for meeting me," she began formally. "I always have time for you, Sophia," Sebastian responded. "Elena doesn't know I'm here," Sophia confessed. "And Javier told me not to interfere, but I can't stay silent anymore." "About what?" "About how miserable my sister is." Sophia looked at him with fierce accusation. "It's been months. The business is going well. We don't have money problems. The evictions were stopped. Everything should be perfect. But Elena cries when she thinks we're not looking. She doesn't sing anymore. She doesn't smile like before." Every word was a knife. "I'm so sorry," Sebastian murmured. "I know you're sorry," Sophia continued relentlessly. "Javier says you really changed. Doña Marta says you're different now. But Elena is stuck. She loves you but can't trust you. She trusts the things you do, but can't forget the lies. She's paralyzed." "What do you want me to do?" Sebastian asked. "I'm giving her space, like she asked." "Maybe too much space," Sophia argued. "She's stubborn, proud. She's not going to make the first move because that means admitting she wants to try again, and that scares her. But you're also waiting for her to approach. You're in a stupid stalemate." She was right. Sebastian saw it clearly. "What do you suggest?" "Fight for her," Sophia said simply. "Really. Not with money or grand gestures, with real vulnerability. Show her your heart completely, without defenses, and let her decide. But give her something to decide with. Right now, you're just giving her empty space, and that space is filling with sadness." The wisdom in this teenager's words was astonishing. "What if I fight, and she definitively rejects me? Then at least you'll know," Sophia shrugged. "And Elena can close that chapter and move on. This limbo isn't good for anyone." Sebastian processed this. It made terrifying sense. He had been so focused on respecting Elena's boundaries that he'd forgotten love also required courage, required being willing to risk rejection for the chance of real connection. "Thank you, Sophia," he said sincerely, "for being brave enough to say this." "Someone had to," she responded. "Just don't hurt my sister again, because if you do, Javier and I know where you live now, and we're more creative with revenge than you'd think." Sebastian laughed, despite the gravity of the moment. "Understood." During the following week, Sebastian planned carefully. Not a grand gesture using his wealth as a shortcut. Something personal, vulnerable, completely honest. He wrote a letter. Pages and pages of raw truth. His childhood in poverty, his mother's death, how wealth had become armor against vulnerability, how Ricardo had betrayed him, and how that had triggered his absurd experiment. How each moment with Elena had peeled layers of that armor, until he found himself emotionally naked for the first time in decades. How losing her had been more painful than any other loss, because it meant losing his best self, the version of Sebastian Marquez she had helped create. He didn't ask for forgiveness in the letter, didn't ask for a second chance, simply explained with brutal honesty who he had been, who he'd become, and how she was the catalyst for that transformation. He ended the letter with a single line. "I love you enough to let you go if that's what you need, but I love you too much not to tell you, one last time, that you changed my life in ways I can never adequately thank you for." He delivered the letter personally to Doña Marta, asking her to give it to Elena when she felt the time was right. Then he waited. 1 week passed. 2 weeks. Sebastian wondered if Elena had read the letter and simply decided not to respond, which was her right. Then, on a cold December afternoon, his phone rang. It was Elena. "Hello." Her voice was soft, hard to read. "Hello," Sebastian responded, heart hammering. "I read your letter." "And?" There was a long pause. "Can you meet me? At the park where we met, where you slept on that ridiculously uncomfortable bench months ago. I'll be there in 20 minutes. When Sebastian arrived at the park, Elena was already there, sitting on that same bench where his journey had begun. The full circle of the story wasn't lost on either of them. He sat beside her, maintaining respectful distance, waiting for her to speak first. "Your letter made me cry," Elena began, looking ahead instead of at him. "It made me angry. It made me think. It's been spinning in my head for days." "I'm sorry if it caused pain," Sebastian said. "Don't apologize for honesty." Elena looked at him finally. "That's what was missing before. If you'd trusted me with this vulnerability months ago, we could have worked with it. But you chose to protect yourself instead of trusting me." "I know. And it was cowardly." "Yes, it was," Elena agreed, "but I also understand why. Your letter helped me see that. It doesn't excuse the deception, but it contextualizes it." "What are you saying?" Sebastian asked, not daring to hope. Elena took a deep breath. "I'm saying I've been thinking a lot about forgiveness, not the cheap kind that pretends the harm didn't happen, but the real kind that acknowledges the pain, but chooses not to be defined by it. And I think I want to try again," Elena said, voice trembling slightly. "But Sebastian, this time it has to be different. Complete honesty even when it hurts. Couples therapy to work through the betrayal trauma. Time to rebuild trust, no shortcuts. And if you ever lie to me again about anything, we're done, no second chances after this." "I accept everything." Sebastian felt tears of relief. "Every condition, every boundary. And I promise, Elena, I promise on everything I am, I'll never lie to you again. I'd rather lose you through painful truth than comfortable dishonesty." Elena finally smiled, small and faint but real. "I'm still angry with you. You should be. You probably will be for a long time. And I'm scared, terrified really." "Me too. But I miss you," Elena admitted, voice breaking. "I miss my friend, I miss my partner. I miss the man who carried my bags and fixed broken things and made my siblings laugh." "I'm still that man," Sebastian said fervently. "That was the real part. Everything else, the money, the status, the corporate power, that's the mask. This," he gestured between them, "this is real." Elena extended her hand tentatively. Sebastian took it, their fingers intertwining like they used to, familiarity mixed with new fragility. "Starting over is scary," Elena murmured. Then let's not start over, Sebastian proposed. Let's continue. But honestly this time, with all the scars visible, all the mistakes acknowledged, let's build something new on the rubble of what was. Elena considered it, then nodded. Okay. But slowly. Very slowly. As slowly as you need, Sebastian promised. They sat together on that bench while the sun set, hands intertwined, silences now comfortable again. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was better. It was a real beginning, imperfect, fragile, but authentic. And for the first time in months, both felt something like peace. The office of Cooperativa de Limpieza Esperanza had grown. It now occupied a space 3 times larger than the original, with 24 women employed as cooperativists, each a co-owner of the business that sustained and dignified them. Elena was in her small but cheerful office, reviewing contracts when Sebastian entered with 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might need this," he said, placing a cup on her desk. It was a ritual they'd developed. Sebastian visited during his lunch hours, brought coffee. They sat together for 30 minutes. "You're a lifesaver." Elena took the cup gratefully, her fingers brushing his briefly. Even after 2 years, each touch still sent electricity through both of them. The 2 years had been hard work. Weekly couples therapy during the first year, navigating emotional relapses when old wounds unexpectedly opened, learning to communicate without defenses, to fight fairly, to repair damage quickly instead of letting it fester. Sebastian had kept his promise of radical honesty. Sometimes it hurt, admitting insecurities, acknowledging selfish impulses before acting on them, being vulnerable when every instinct screamed for protection. But it was worth it for the trust that slowly, gradually, rebuilt itself. Elena had done her own work, learning to trust again without naivety, to maintain boundaries without cruelty, to forgive without forgetting. "How's the housing project going?" Elena asked, referring to Sebastian's latest initiative, converting old buildings into housing cooperatives for low-income families. "Complex, but progressing," Sebastian responded. "Families in the first building are moving in next month, watching them choose paint for their walls, plan their spaces, knowing they're real owners, not just tenants. It's indescribable, Elena." She smiled, proud. "Look who's understanding that real success is human impact, not quarterly profits." "I had a good teacher," Sebastian winked at her. The door suddenly opened and Javier entered, now in his 2nd year of engineering university. He divided his time between studies and helping manage the technological aspects of Elena's business. "Elena, the meeting with the new client is in 10 minutes, he reminded, then noticed Sebastian. "Oh, hi. Did I interrupt a cheesy session?" "Respectfully shut up," Elena responded, but she was smiling. "Where's Sophia?" "In class, where she should be on a Monday afternoon." Javier rolled his eyes affectionately toward his younger sister, who was now in high school and had developed a passion for social justice that worried and made her siblings equally proud. The family dynamic had adjusted with Sebastian's return to their lives. It wasn't instant or simple. Javier had taken months to fully trust again. Sophia, ironically the one who had pushed for reconciliation, had been the most protective after, watching every interaction between Sebastian and Elena like a hawk. But gradually they had found a new balance. Sebastian didn't try to be a substitute father. The siblings already had parents who called regularly from their village. Instead, he was mentor, friend, financial support, when appropriate but never condescending. He had established educational funds for both, but with conditions: scholarships that required maintaining grades, doing community service, demonstrating personal growth. Not free gifts, but investments in their potential. After Javier left, Elena looked at Sebastian thoughtfully. "Do you remember where we were exactly 2 years ago?" "On that bench in the park," Sebastian responded without hesitation, deciding if we were brave enough to try rebuilding. "Do you think we succeeded?" Elena asked. Sebastian considered carefully. "We achieved something better than rebuilding. We built something new, not based on lies or fantasy, but on painful truth and commitment to grow together." "Very diplomatic," Elena laughed. "But seriously, are you happy?" "Happier than I've been in my life," Sebastian responded honestly. not because everything is perfect, but because it's real. I wake up next to you. They had moved in together 6 months ago, after a year and a half of rebuilding trust. And that's a blessing I never take for granted. I work on projects that improve real lives instead of just increasing profit margins. I have a family, he gestured toward where Javier had been, that challenges me to be better. And your company almost killed you last week when you proposed another executive salary cap, Elena recalled with amusement. They'll survive, Sebastian shrugged. If they can't live comfortably on just 10 times the lowest-ranked employee's salary, they have perspective problems. Elena studied his face, searching for signs of resentment for the restrictions he'd self-imposed. She found none. This was truly who he'd become, someone who measured wealth in impact and relationships, not in account numbers. I love you, she said suddenly, voice full of emotion she no longer feared expressing. I love you more, Sebastian responded, as he always did. Impossible, Elena counter-argued, their old game. Totally possible, Sebastian insisted, standing and walking around the desk. He knelt in front of her chair, taking her hands. In fact, I love you so much that... He pulled a small box from his pocket. Elena gasped. Sebastian, what are you doing? Something I should have done honestly 2 years ago, he said, opening the box to reveal a simple but beautiful ring, a gold band with a small diamond, nothing ostentatious, but clearly quality. Elena Jimenez, I'm not perfect. I'll probably make more mistakes, but I promise to always be honest, always work on being better, always love you with every part of my being. Will you do me the honor of marrying me? Elena had tears rolling down her cheeks. You're doing this in my office on a random workday without fanfare. Because real doesn't need production, Sebastian responded. This is us, simple, honest, imperfect, but authentic. Yes, Elena whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. Sebastian slid the ring onto her finger, fitting perfectly, of course. He'd bribed Javier to get her size, and kissed her with all the emotion that words couldn't capture. When they separated, both laughing and crying simultaneously, Sebastian rested his forehead against hers. We'll build a beautiful life together, he promised. We already have, Eleanor corrected. The last 2 years, with all their difficulty, were already beautiful. This is just continuation. She was right. It wasn't a new beginning. It was a continuous evolution of something they'd been building since that first day at the restaurant when she had given him food without judgment. That night, they celebrated with Javier and Sofia at old Doña Marta's kitchen. The robust owner cried openly when she saw the ring, declaring she had always known that those 2 idiots would find their way back to each other. Other neighborhood neighbors joined the impromptu celebration. Women from Elena's cooperative, families Sebastian had helped through his housing projects, people who had watched them grow individually and together. It was community, real, complicated, beautiful. Sebastian looked around the table, seeing faces that had become more precious than any corporate boardroom, and finally understood what his mother had tried to teach him years ago before her death, that wealth was love, connection, belonging. It had taken decades, a self-imposed fall into poverty, and a fortuitous encounter with a generous cleaner for that lesson to truly penetrate. But it was worth every moment of pain. As they toasted with cheap beers and sodas, Elena leaned in and whispered in his ear, "Thank you." "For what?" Sebastian asked, confused. "For being brave enough to be vulnerable, for really changing, not just promising change, for loving enough to do the hard work." "Thank you," Sebastian responded, "for seeing who I could be when I didn't even see it myself, for forgiving the unforgivable, for giving me a second chance I never deserved, but will always treasure." They kissed under the fluorescent light of the small restaurant, surrounded by the community that had shaped them both, with an uncertain but promising future stretching before them. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was better. It was real. And that was enough.